All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started since it looks like we have a pretty good audience. All right, come on in, have a seat, make yourself comfortable. All right, guys, my name is Aubrey Turner, and I'm a client solutions advisor at Optiv focusing on identity access management. This afternoon, I'm going to talk to you about why should identity be at the core of your security strategy, and how we got to this moment in time, why we're here, what it means to you, what it could mean to you. I look at this as an opportunity for us all, right? There have been a number of moments in the history of identity access management, including, the first sort of life cycle type solutions, governance, and now again, I think we're at a seminal moment where there's a lot of dynamic changes in identity, and really the namesake of this conference, intelligent identity. That's what we're about. That's what I'm here to kind of talk to you about, pitch you on this opportunity. So we know that there's some challenges that we've had in identity, and we've continued to solve those, right? Things like life cycle and really being operationally efficient around how we manage users, right? With some caveats. We've tackled governance and compliance. We even tackled external identities, right? So there's a lot of good things that we've done in identity. We're even at the point now where we can manage cloud identity and data that's beyond our four walls. So we know that there's some good things, right, that identity is doing for us. And we're going to continue to solve for those things. And that's the result of these challenges, again, are these goods, the value that we're driving from identity. Again, meeting compliance and doing user lifecycle management, solving those things. With that said, of course, there's some bad that goes along with that. Having an immature program can lead to data breaches, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we know that there's a rapid acceleration in terms of breaches, and they've reached a record high as of 2016. So along with that good, we've got this bad. Worse still though, right, identity is complex. It matters, but it's not easy, and we all know that. So those are the challenges, and again, this is about that opportunity related to that, hey, we're at this point where we know we're doing some good things, there's some bad things occurring, and then identity is not easy, right? It's very, very challenging, right? So the practitioners in this room can certainly speak to that for a number of reasons. When we look at identity, we look at it as an evolution, and your journey being an incremental one. And so I'd like to ask the audience here, how many kind of see their IAM program in some sort of minimal investment, right? Just kind of getting started. Show of hands. All right, a handful. How many see their program or what they're doing in identity as more project-based, so it's kind of siloed implementations of technologies? Okay, a few more there. And then how many are at the point where they have a very formal governance structure around their IAM program? A couple. And I've asked that question for six months of this year across the country, and that's about the distribution that I think I would see. So, sort of a third maybe getting started, a third, hey, we're doing some projects, and a third, hey, maybe they've got some more formal structure around the actual program. But what's interesting and what's cool and what this opportunity is that I'm pitching to you is this extended IAM investments. Can somebody volunteer to kind of tell me what they think that is? Anyone? Anyone who doesn't work for Optiv? No? Yes, sir? No? All right, I thought I had a taker, but anyway. It's really about intelligent identity, right? The namesake of this very conference that we're at, right? Intelligent identity. It's about extending your investments, the technologies that you have, right? And again, you likely would have had to step through some of these phases on your journey, right? From getting started to being a little bit more mature and having a formal program. But extending your IAM investments, that's again the opportunity that I'm here talking about, and this is again identity being core to your security strategy. So working through those various stages. So what's driving us in this direction, right? What's creating this opportunity for us in identity? A lot of internal forces, and just highlighting a couple here, and we could spend an entire session talking about these internal forces, but I'll make it short and sweet. Digital transformation or digital business evolution, one of the key contributors to leading us to, hey, why should we have identity at the core of our security strategy? Supply chains and our organizations being more open, right? The last few years, we've talked about this in a sort of a not a very focused way, right? My colleagues and I and others in the space talked about identity being the new perimeter. We've talked about identity being integrated into everything, and this is the extension of that conversation, right? That intelligent identity. And the forces that have driven us, the forces that have driven us from that point a couple of years ago, and I think that the term identity is the new perimeter is about 4 years old, I think, so it's not new, but it's taken us some time to get from that point to the point now where we're talking about intelligent identity and what it can do for us and why we need it. So again, these internal forces, cloud, et cetera, the Internet of Things, all these things are those forces internally that are driving us. Of course, we've got the bad guys, right? Nation states, hacktivists, all that stuff, chasing our intellectual property, sensitive, personally identifiable information, you name it, right? So those are the external forces that are also contributing to this pivotal moment. And again, the opportunity that we're faced with. And a few slides back, I kind of showed that the trajectory of breaches, right? So the external forces are certainly there. We also know that we're making and have made a lot of cybersecurity investments, right? So the companies that are in this room have likely, invested a lot in cybersecurity. You spent millions, tens of millions, potentially if you're a large enough company, hundreds of millions on cybersecurity. So you've bought endpoint, you've bought IDS, IPS, you bought firewalls, you bought a lot of perimeter technology solutions. And again, the question is, how effective have they been? Again, we know that there's, the breaches point to a different thing. And not to demean the efforts of a lot of our colleagues, right? But we still have breaches. So with all these investments across these areas, we've got some effectiveness, but it can be also marginalized to some degree. And you require a lot of skilled personnel, right, to run all these different components in your environment. But we look a little bit more closely, we can begin to understand that nearly every security problem potentially is an IAM problem. Let that sink in for a moment and just kind of contemplate that. We look at it from a breach perspective when we talk about credential theft, right? That is an identity problem. And we know that, if we look at things like the Verizon data breach report and other things, that a lot of the breaches it can be traced back to forensically to some kind of credential theft. So again, contemplating that every security problem can be traced back to or is an IAM problem. Again, sort of further evidence to why making identity part of your cybersecurity strategy is an approach that we need to more strongly consider, right? And again, take the opportunity to do that. Along with that previous slide, we look at the technologies, right? And I talked about the investments that we've made across cybersecurity. And this NASCAR slide of vendors here, right, is every sort of technology represented. The cool thing is that a lot of these technologies already have some context of identity included with them, right? I went to RSA earlier this year. Again, a lot of the sort of new and cool vendors, they are building their technologies with identity as part of some context of identity as part of that solution. And again, this is what I'm talking about, the opportunity to embrace that, right? To leverage that to help mature, help mitigate risk in cybersecurity threats. You may own one or more of these technologies, and you likely do, right? They may be in your environment. And again, going back to the topic of the name of this conference, intelligent identity, and just to kind of show the kind of stakes that we're at. So in terms of, hey, we've got all these technologies and the opportunities there for certainly us to leverage them in a more meaningful way. On top of that, so we bought all these technologies, right? The technology vendors are trying to do their part to embed identity, right? On the other side of that is in terms of our own organization. So how many CISOs or directors of security do we have in the room? Any? One, two? Hey, sir, do you own identity? Do you own and control identity at your?
No, we don't.
You do not. Who does?
Our identity is mapped to our product, so our product team owns it.
Right. Okay, so that's a fairly consistent response that we've been getting when I asked that question, right? And it's not a bad thing. It's just a reality of the things that our CISOs have had to deal with and sort of how they kind of may have come up through the respective companies that you work at. In some cases, at another conference, I asked that, and one of the CISOs had actually chosen to give identity back to whoever it was that had it, right? They were asking him to own it, didn't feel comfortable. So we're faced with that as well. And you'll hear some of the other talks that we're advocating that CISOs sort of own and control identity where it makes sense. And that's part of this opportunity to, again, help mitigate cybersecurity threats and incidents. So the main point of this graphic here is that we've got a lot of individuals at a given company that are interested in identity data, right? They want it either for marketing or privacy or to do data governance things, access governance, user access, reviews and whatnot. So there's a lot of people pulling for identity or pulling the identity data strings, but we're still at a point where we think that CISOs should, where it makes sense, own and control more of identity. And that could be internal identity, external identity, depending on how you define those at your given organization. Some questions for you all to ponder as I sort of start the kind of wrap-up aspect of this presentation. Think about how you would answer these questions in a moment of crisis, right? If somebody came to you and said, hey, somebody's knocking on our front door in a logical way, right? Trying to get access to our network, or maybe something bad has already happened. How would you answer these questions if somebody came to you, right? Do you have centralized identity governance? How did somebody gain the access? When and how are they using that access? How would you answer those? Would you be able to efficiently go to one place and kind of pull that together? Or would you be in a circumstance where you're looking at multiple systems to sort of try to correlate all of that data? So think about those questions, because I think, again, they're critical to this idea of identity being core to your security strategy. So how do we get there? How do we move from project-based to from getting started to project-based to more mature programs to a circumstance where we've extended identity investments and intelligent identity? So what we're talking about is identity-defined security, and we see that as the future. That's how we feel that we're going to move from point A to point B. And this is the blueprint for that future. And I kind of used to talk about, really, that this is a very sort of forward-leaning topic, right? Should identity be core to your security strategy? And as even the last 6 months have elapsed and things have happened, I think that future is here. I think the opportunity is here. And here's how we're going to do it. But a couple things, right? We're not about building bigger walls. This is not a pitch or talk about an opportunity to build bigger walls because the bad guys are just going to build taller ladders. This is not about replicating perimeter techniques, right? We want to talk about extending identity beyond our four walls, and in fact, it's already happened probably in your organization if you've got people who work remotely in any capacity. But it's about evolving adapting more dynamic security models. We want to build trust and confidence in our relationships, our business to enterprise, our business to business, our business to consumer. We want to extend the security beyond the firewall, and we do that, of course, through identity, if you've been keeping up. And we want to be able to seamlessly connect users from any resource, or from any device, rather, to any resource, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we want to, that's what identity-defined security is about. And I talked about these, a lot of the technologies, right, that go back to the NASCAR, the vendor slide there. And I've already mentioned that the vendors are already building identity into a lot of these technologies that you may already have. And what I learned from going to RSA is certainly any new product, those vendors are already building identity into those as well. So it's about using contextual identity data and going back to the pitch, the namesake of this conference, right? Intelligent identity. That's what we're advocating. That's what we're talking about. So how do we go forward? How do we bring this together? How do we make identity-defined security or identity-centric security more real and take advantage of this opportunity that is before us? A couple of thoughts that I have. So one, fight to own identity. So if you're in that director of security or chief information security role, fight to own and control identity. Because IAM is becoming a critical path to solving some of our cybersecurity issues, right? Talked about, hey, every problem is an identity, every cybersecurity problem is potentially an identity problem. That's going to take leadership from our security practitioners or our directors of security to sort of fight to own and control identity. Think outside the box. Don't necessarily sort of, go for these single point defense solutions. Look at integrating the solutions that you have via identity. And on the same hand that I talked about, hey, that is these cool new vendors at RSA that have embedded identity as part of their solution. I didn't say that to mean, hey, run out and buy the next new shiny technology. That's not what I'm talking about. I think you need to inventory what you own. So if you go back to that, again, that slide with all those vendors, before you go out and issue a PO for some kind of cool technology, take a look at what you have. Potentially in that version or upcoming version, potentially the vendor has already embedded identity as part of a context, so again, intelligent identity. So there's that opportunity to tie your security solutions together via identity. And then if you do have a gap right after that inventory, well then go out and maybe see what the space has to offer. And defining security around identity, and that's the very core of this topic, is making identity core to your security strategy. So as whether you're in that director of security position or CISO or you're an identity practitioner, partnering with your security team to make sure that they're fully embedding identity as part of their planning processes and solution and their solution design processes. A couple other things. We intend to make progress through the alliances, and there are different kinds of alliances, right? So they're industry-aligned alliances as well as vendor alliances. So some of our vendor partners that are here have gotten together, formed their own alliances to develop technical solutions. We want to make sure, at least speaking for Optiv, on behalf of Optiv, that we have alignment, and standardization. That's going to make all your lives easier as you look to consume some of these solutions. The Identity-Defined Security Alliance is one of those alliances. We've spent some time defining blueprint, defining use cases. But what I would ask of all of you as identity security practitioners is to let your voice be heard, speak up. All right, we can go ahead and define these use cases, but we want to make sure that we course correct. If there are particular problems that you're experiencing in your environment and you said, hey, I wonder if there's a solution for this, if I can take these two technologies and solve a cybersecurity problem, we want to hear about that. So encouraging you all to sort of speak up, let your voice be heard in terms of, hey, we need these solutions. I have these technologies, they don't work together. Hey, is there a use case that exists to kind of solve that? We've taken the first step in defining some of those, but again, it's not going to be as effective as if our as if our practitioners speak up and sort of join the movement, so to speak. So that's the opportunity, right? Letting or having identity be core to your security strategy. And there are actually interoperable solutions, some of which you will see here at CIS. And be able to ask more questions. I've got a few minutes left. Are there any questions about the topic? You know, I've done some of these talks around the country so far this year, and one of the questions I've gotten is, you know, how real is this? But I'd like to offer up in the next few minutes for somebody to ask me a question about identity-defined security and making identity core to your security strategy. Anyone? Yes, sir?
How much have y'all done with like analyzing user behavior, so finding anomalies after they've authenticated, things like that, to find out maybe their credentials have been stolen?
Right. Great question, and that is certainly one of the use cases. And so the question was around how much have we done around analyzing user behavior. Is it from a pre-authenticate or post-authentication perspective, right? So we certainly looked into that, and we have partnerships where we're designing use cases that look at user behavior as part of it. As part of my day job, I've actually spoken to some clients who've actually made the plunge into user behavior with varying success. There are some environments where the UABA tool has worked well, and there are others where it has not. And so I think it's might be more impactful given your organization and the type of business that you run, the type of identity data that you have. But it is certainly something that we're looking at, and again, integrating it with authentication, SSO technologies to kind of round out that use case. Did you want to say anything more about that, Ian? No? Tomorrow. Okay, so tomorrow we'll be able to, Ian will talk a little bit more about that. Yes, sir?
Just to follow up the gentleman's question, right?
Yeah.
What are the use cases where you have actually seen UIBA work and where it did not work? More.
Yeah, so I've got a pretty large financial services client in Florida, and they looked at, and I won't mention the specific technology, but they had a hard time they're skeptical, right? I've got another client that is in the healthcare space, and they had a sort of a POC, and in their environment, they loved it, and they haven't made a purchase yet, but they can they're working on building the business case to get funding because it actually worked in their environment.
So is it so much of certain products work, or is it the underlying technology at question here?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's both. I think it is the underlying technology, and that UABA space is relatively new in terms of identity. It's a relatively new space. I think there's still tremendous room for growth in terms of the algorithms and the underlying technology. So I think it's both. I think certain vendors may have a head start than others. But again, I do think part of it is the actual technology itself still has a lot of room for growth. Brian, did you have a question?
I did. So, Aubrey, before you mentioned levels of maturity.
Yeah.
Is there a specific level of maturity the customer has to be at, before they can really start to take advantage of anything from identity security?
You know, that's a great question. I used to think that you should have to be in that program stage of maturity, right? You would have to, and we know that identity is successful as you increment through the journey, right? You become a little bit more sophisticated in terms of how you're doing identity. I would say that, though, that there's some use cases where if you are just getting started, where you may actually, the use case may be effective. And I'll give you a for example, right? If you have an identity governance tool and you have a privileged account security technology, maybe you want to certify the users that have access to those privileged accounts. I think even in a project-based sort of stage, you could build that integration and not have it be so overwhelming. You may not need to be a fully mature identity program to have that be successful. I think there's some organizational sort of caveats and things like that may impact whether or not you're project-based or fully fully program governance stood up that'll drive whether you're successful. I would certainly say that there's probably some fundamental things, though, that you have to have in terms of identity, right? You've got to have some processes, and there's some key things, I think, that you have to have in place before you can begin taking advantage of this. But I don't think you have to be fully matured program-wise, right, to take advantage of intelligent identity or extended identity investments. And again, some of the clients that I know have looked at UEBA tools are not necessarily fully mature from an identity perspective, so they may be leapfrogging from project-based to extended identity investments. Yes?
Just a follow-up to that, if we talk about low-hanging fruit, right, is there, I know obviously you put up that graphic as
Yep.
to show, you know, the full breadth of capability from a security integration perspective over time. The low-hanging fruit, right, I mean, stuff that folks in a very tactical way can really start to hammer out and tie certain things together and sort of, like you said,
Yeah.
add context, make it more intelligent. I mean, what are we looking at? Cloud,
Yeah.
you know, EMM, I mean, what else would you see or you're seeing your customers kind of focus on?
Yeah, multi-factor authentication. I see that, personally, I see that as a low-hanging fruit, right? So integrating your SSO solution with multi-factor authentication, integrating your privileged account security solution with multi-factor authentication, I think that is low-hanging fruit. I think that's another use case that you don't necessarily have to be fully mature to take advantage of that kind of identity-defined security. There's some more complicated things that you can certainly do from a risk-based authentication, adaptive authentication perspective that may be more suitable to a more mature organization. But just having multi-factor authentication, I think in those two very high-level use cases, I certainly see a lot of our clients going that route. So that would be my take on that and my recommendation should I get asked. You don't need to wait until you have a fully mature program before you're doing some of those things. Great question. Yes, sir.
Do you always see CM solutions and UBA going hand in hand, or can one coexist without the other?
What was the first part?
The CM solutions,
CM.
gathering security.
Oh, Splunk. Oh man, that's an awesome question. So a couple years ago, and again, the UEBA space is relatively new. A couple years ago, the UEBA platforms, and it was UBA back then, they talked about being complementary to solutions like Splunk and other technologies, other IDS, IPS, firewall, SIM technologies, right? That may have some element of machine learning embedded. What I've heard from the UEBA vendors now is that they see themselves as a SIM replacement in many cases. So again, depending on your maturity, depending on other factors, you may hear a pitch from a UEBA vendor that says, hey, don't worry if you haven't fully developed your SIM. If you have lots of data in your SIM, UEBA can sort of funnel that down into more actionable type targets or type events that somebody can sort of really do something about. So that's the pitch and that's the trend that I'm seeing from the UEBA vendors. I personally would take that with a grain of salt and kind of show me, don't tell me kind of thing. But that's how I see the sort of relationship between sort of the SIM and that space and the UEBA space. The UEBA space, they're certainly talking about being more advanced than SIM and being a SIM replacement instead of a SIM complement. Great questions.
And I
Yeah.
think the flip is also true, right? So if you look at how the SIM vendors view it, they are now offering a lot of those UEBA capabilities
Right.
from an intelligence perspective, right? So I think they recognize that they want to, I mean, both parties, they want to have be a standalone segment of the space anymore. They've got to continue to evolve now. So you're seeing a lot of convergence. Some of that was just from the amount of false positives and things, or lack of context that came into, alerts as part of the log source of these sort of centralized ways. So I mean, we'll continue to see that. I think that consolidation and that evolution, but it's very bi-directional.
Yeah.
So you were talking about taking with the grain of salt. Why?
Taking
Taking SIM, like UVA SIM and stuff as a grain of salt. Like, to me, it seems like a SIM. I was losing people, but like
yeah.
taking SIM
It is. It is. And I couldn't agree more. But I think what hopefully I followed up with, if a vendor is making that pitch to you, right, hey, we can help you decrease false positives, I want you to show me how that's done. Because in some of the cases where I've seen actual clients do a UBA POC, it's been with limited success. So that's where I'm coming from in terms of like, hey, if they're telling you, hey, we can help you decrease this rate of false positives down to next zero and really give you only actionable events. I've seen a UBA product have just as much noise as a SIM, right? So there's an element of tuning and having the UBA product actually build a pattern of history. So that's what I mean by take it with a grain of salt. And again, to the gentleman who asked the question here, that space is still new and it's still developing. I think you're right that the combination of those two technologies, and as Brian talked about, the SIM vendors are embedding UEBA and so forth to make it more bidirectional. I think that's certainly, again, the opportunity for us to be more secure, I think, is there. I would just advocate doing your homework and your due diligence and just kind of being cautious about what they're offering.
So I'm a vendor, not a consumer, so that's...
Who do you work for?
my job.
Yeah, they might be. Who do you work for?
Core security.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I wasn't necessarily knocking a vendor per se.
I mean, we're not there yet. We don't
Yeah.
have that product yet. It's just, that's literally my job right now.
No, it makes sense. So to your point, right, I mean, there's two components, right? There's the ability to consolidate data somewhere in the way, and then there's intelligence.
Curtis.
Yeah, so
Thank you, sir.
my
Appreciate that. Thanks, man. How are you?